Lord David Owen.
Well, first of all, I'm sure on behalf of everybody, I congratulate everybody who's been involved in this film. It's a very moving film, but it's constrained, scientific, and it seems to me they've gone to every possible way of presenting this tragedy as objectively as possible. Now, what are the lessons of it? I suppose we should just start with the UK. I was Minister of Health in 1974, and just before I did that, I read a book by a remarkable professor of sociology called Richard Titmuss, and it was called The Gift Relationship. If anybody's interested in this, I recommend strongly to read it, because he was not a scientist, it wasn't a politician, it wasn't a commercial pharmaceuticalist. He just looked at this story and he drew certain conclusions from it. And the gift relationship was the gift of a blood, your blood, to somebody who needed it. And he tried to describe, if you like, the sociology of it, the feeling that this is a gift. And he drew attention to the fact that we were lucky in this country at the time that the most you got back for it was a cup of tea when you went to the blood transfusion service. And he drew attention to the fact that in many other parts of the world you could sell your blood. And I remembered, as I read this book, being a young medical student, going to Greece and discovering we were all pretty broke, that we could give blood and be paid for it. So we trooped off and got our, in those days, drachmas, and I sort of suddenly saw this process. And I remembered how little checks there were, how little... So he then unveiled the story of the commercial selling of blood. And you realize really there were two quite different systems then operating. And the only real screening test we had of hepatitis, which we suspected and knew all along would carry a virus in it, was a simple question. Have you ever been yellow? i.e., had you ever been jaundiced? And Titmuss drew out that almost by definition, that screening test would become known by people who were selling their blood and druggists and other people. And you saw that rather moving picture very early on in the film of the type of people who were being paid to take their blood in poor countries, particularly in countries in North Africa at the time. And they soon, of course, got to realize that the test, have you been yellow, if you said you had been yellow, meant that you were stopped from being blood. Well, they just went to the next place where you could sell your blood. And he pointed out that we were effectively having a risk of infecting blood supplies. So it seemed to me there was only one thing that I could do, which would be to build up blood self-sufficiency so that we were taking in enough transfusions into our system for free, and that we would, as far as humanly possible, try to build up that we would only use our own blood. It needed a fairly substantial expansion of the transfusion, but that was not because there weren't enough donors. It was enough because there wasn't enough cost available. Anyhow, I want to avoid this story becoming a sort of told you so story, but I was helped by many, many people, television companies like what was it called then, In Action, something in Action, World in Action, did a television program about it. Anyhow, by then the decision had been taken, we were going to go for self-sufficiency, and I think the first tranche of money was 2 million. It wasn't almost surely enough really, but the decision was made. But the one thing I was adamant about, I would announce it to Parliament, And so in 75 it was announced to Parliament that we had made the decision to go for self-sufficiency in blood. Then I went off to the Foreign Office, and it all sort of seemed to disappear out of it, and I thought we were aiming for blood self-sufficiency. Parliament was never told that that programme was effectively starved of money, blocked, and they gave up self-sufficiency. So that is the way we start in a democracy. How was it possible that a Parliament was told of a decision and it was then changed without them ever being told of it? That is meant to be something that no civil servant should ever agree to, and no minister should ever agree to. The rest of the story that unfolded here was very much the same that's happened in Britain, more or less identically the same. When it started to blow up as a major issue in the early 80s, we started to get more active. It was extremely difficult to get this looked at. I tried to get the Health Ombudsman to look at it. I had in my constituency somebody who was a haemophiliac who had developed AIDS. You could only, at that stage, take a case to the Ombudsman if they were somebody who were your constituent and you could show that they were they themselves. So it was an extremely important individual case, which he did, and quite understandably wanted his, it kept private his own thing. And we did take it all through. We failed. Every single move that I have taken to get more compensation, to encourage people, to work with Alf Morris, to try to get the public review, the Archer report, endless questions, has never been successful. Government has doled out as little money as they can get away with in public opinion at the time, so that it takes it off the headlines of the newspapers, and then it comes back again and they do a little bit more. So the saga is pretty much the same as we've seen in America. I must say, during this time I got very depressed about it all, but then an issue came up. In 2010, the new coalition government, I must say I expected better of it, suddenly announced that the company that we had that was involved in blood products, which was actually owned by the government and had been bought as a sort of national thing by the previous Labour government, was now going to be sold. I did everything I could to try to oppose this sale. And you heard the story of the pharmaceutical industry, which you will have heard things. I'd make it quite clear to you, I've got no animus against the pharmaceutical industry. I was on the board of Abbott Laboratories in the United States of America for 15 years. I think it was a very principled and fine company. I'm not saying everything we did was marvelous. We had a good HIV drug at one stage. We were not in blood products, but we did deal with trying to get a treatment for hepatitis C, and one of our drugs was in that bowl. So I do not come from the view that the pharmaceutical industry is loaded against you and everything like this. I don't take that view, and I don't believe that they're corrupt, and I believe they're people who no doubt have some relatives who may have had a haemophilia or may have had hepatitis as a result of this. So I think we need to get away from this. But I think we need to be very clear about this whole thing of the public and the private sector. As is very clear from that film, mistakes have been made at every level. Government, doctors, public sector, private sector. And all behind it is basically money. And the real problem is that this is what you have in a health service. This is what you have in healthcare. The demand is basically infinite, and resources have to be rationed. So when we look at this decision making, bear that in mind. No public health service, like our National Health Service, can provide everything that the public requires. But the truth is a pretty important something to hold on to. And that is where, at every stage, the truth has been there and people have evaded it. And that must carry a penalty with it. When I started to go back to my documents, I went back and asked to go and see my own documents in my private office. After some time, I was given the answer they couldn't find it, first of all, and then I was told that they'd all been scrapped. There's a 30-year rule over government documents. You don't own them until after 30 years, but you can go back and look at them. I mean, I was not completely unknown. I was still in some measure of public life at that time, that I was never asked whether these documents could have been, if they wanted to kill them off under 15 years, and that is written down. They're now denying it, I gather. And I also had put all my documents anyhow into Liverpool University. So my suspicions arose. I am by nature a believer in the cock-up theory of politics. I don't believe in conspiracies. They sometimes exist, but by far the most obvious thing is a frightful mess. But I have become convinced that there has been a cleaning up of documents, and it seems to me it's not just in this country, but it's in many countries, because the whole bureaucracy is geared up to the fact that down the track lay lawsuits, massive costs, and they defended their health service because they felt there was better use for that money. I mean, I don't think it was even wrong decisions they take. They started to take it into it all. And I don't say that some of those doctors that didn't tell people, they were afraid of the truth almost. The answer is, at every level, when people knew things, they should have been told. And when companies were faced by choices and things, they should have fessed up to the fact of how they were making decisions. And the regulatory authorities, the FDA or the Medicines Commission, or now the European Medicines in Britain, should have made much, much tougher decisions and accepted costs. I don't know where we're going to go. I've almost given up myself. Where did it all go very badly wrong? The cover-up, as I think. I think it began in France, where the Minister of Health, Fabius, who then later went on to be Prime Minister, made a decision that many other health ministers have made. It was not peculiar to him, but he was taken to court, and it looked at one moment as if he might even go to prison. And I think that at that stage, there was a decision to clean up all the files and stop some of the incriminating evidence. It seems in America they've been more successful at getting out the truth, and particularly that inquiry that took place when it was given the charge of review of the whole proceedings in 1995. What should we do now? Well, I think you should go on pursuing the financial compensation. It's inadequate for very many people who have been affected, individual families. And I think that's certainly, the thing cannot be just left. And so that one I do believe you should do. I think it should become much more evident, the scale of the cover-up and the way that the truth has been avoided, because it's only when that has become common knowledge, medical students understand it in their training, they're taught about it, they learn that there is a cover-up sort of scenario, that you are going to get better decision-making. There's no magic solution to this situation. It has happened. But the lesson is, it will happen again. It will happen again. This company, this publicly owned blood products company in this country, was sold not to Baxter's, which the company you saw there, which is very skilled in this whole area, and I think has cleaned up its act and is using all the most modern techniques. It was sold to a company called Bain, which is a private equity company. It was sold purely and simply for one reason, that they thought they could get more money out of it, because these people would fatten it up with profits and then sell it again. I think it was a year ago, or maybe a little less than that. Exactly what was predicted happened. Bain took it on with no pharmaceutical anything, just to make it, fatten it up, sold it on. The government kept 20% staying, so it got a slight gain for the taxpayer, they'll claim, and it was sold off to another company. Now that was an outrageous decision. Now all I can say is I tried my best. I tried to get publicity for it in this country. You'd have thought somebody with this whole history out there in the world of British journalism and press would take it up. With very few exceptions, absolutely no interest. And so having done that once, they'll do it again, and they'll do it again, and before you know where you are, your blood products industry will get outside your control. The lady who said in the last thing about how much of this stuff was now pushed off outside into other countries where the regulatory atmosphere is much less. There are certain elements of treatment, certain drugs and things like that, which governments should say are going to be manufactured in our own countries, unless we know that really well about those countries. But they're afraid of doing so. So you have trade agreements which are not related to this at all, and that's used as the excuse to having no regulatory control and taking it out of any form of really tough scrutiny. This whole area is a mess. It is still a mess. It has not been cleaned up, and a younger generation than me will have to go on fighting like that. I'm very glad to see that Baroness Featherstone is doing it now in the House of Lords, and she will have every help. But I'm 78 now. I must say there are limits to what I can now do. My files are that high on this whole issue, and I have failed, and I feel very miserable about it.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Owen, and I can only say that I know me, and I know that many people in our community hold you in very high regard for what you've done, and we thank you very much for it.